Sea surface temperature, for decades measured by satellites.
An international mission to study Earth's salty seas.
But sea surface salinity measured from space is relatively new. NASA wants to know the relationship between surface salinity and the underlying processes that determine the global distribution of ocean salinity.
One of the big applications of measuring salinity from satellites is that it does tell you something about the global water cycle. And this is something that's of increasing concern as the Earth heats up.
121 degrees.
A lot of studies have shown that the hydrological cycle is intensifying. Observations have shown that the saltier regions of the ocean are actually getting saltier, and the fresher regions are getting fresher. And that's an example of how we can use salinity to observe the water cycle. What the satellites did show us was that the salinity field is way more dynamic than anyone thought.
To study these processes further, NASA is fielding SPURS, the salinity processes in the upper ocean regional study. Concentrating at first on one of the saltiest regions of the world's oceans, the North Atlantic. Now SPURS scientists are concentrating on one of the freshest parts of the ocean, the eastern tropical Pacific.
I'm a meteorologist who's been really interested in how the weather affects the ocean and its ability to heat and its ability to give energy and moisture back to the atmosphere for new weather. And SPURS-2 is exactly that kind of a project.
SPURS-2 is wide-ranging. UW scientists from the Applied Physics Laboratory's Air-Sea Interaction and Remote Sensing Department are focused on one major aspect.
Our component of the SPURS experiment in particular is to understand what happens to all the rainwater that falls on the ocean surface. So in the tropics, it's not like, drizzly Seattle rain. Rain occurs at really strong, intense bursts. Our objective is to really understand what's happening while it's raining, just after it rains. Because it's rainwater, it's lighter or less dense than the underlying ocean water, so it floats. So these fresh layers sit on the ocean surface, and then due to wind or ocean convection, they slowly mix into the ocean both vertically and horizontally at the edges. And that's one of the questions we're really interested in, is what are those processes?
The focus of this study is to take what we know about the weather behavior, the size of the precipitating systems, the wind gustiness that goes along with it, the periods of intense versus more broad and light rain over periods of time. Take all that information and see whether that has anything to do with how the ocean responds to rain and how the ocean stores the rainfall.
The APL-UW Airs Department experiments will deploy three elements. The first, the Surface Salinity Profiler.
Literally two surfboards that are strapped together, and one of them has a keel on it that's about 1 meter long, and on that keel there's salinity and temperature sensors. And so we drag that or tow that behind and beside the ship outside of its wake as we're moving through a rainstorm. And so that gives you this constant measurement of temperature and salinity at these different depths. So my contribution to that platform is microstructure sensors. So those just measure the temperature and the conductivity really, really fast. That tells you something about the turbulence. What we're trying to figure out is when it rains, there's sort of a bunch of energy from the rain and from the wind that's input into the ocean, and we're trying to measure what that actually is. And then once it stops raining, that mixing continues, and that helps distribute all this fresh water you've just dumped on the ocean surface into the rest of the ocean. So it's really valuable to know what the turbulent dissipation rate is at that level. In addition to measuring the turbulence at 30 centimeters, we're also interested in what the turbulence is right at the sea surface, so right at the interface between the atmosphere and the ocean. And that's a really challenging place to measure, as you can imagine.
The second element, the controlled flux technique.
You use a high-powered CO2 laser to heat up a little patch of the sea surface. And we have an infrared camera measuring the sea surface temperature of this area that we've heated up. And so using that technique, we can infer what the turbulence is right at that interface.
The third element, a lighter-than-air infrared system.
a huge helium balloon. It's about 15 feet across that has another infrared imager on it looking down. And we tow that from the boat about 300 feet up in the air. That infrared camera measures the very surface temperature of the ocean. And it's typically colder than the ocean water. So as it's raining and raindrops are falling on the sea surface, that changes the sea surface temperature. And then after it stops raining, all of that fresh water we've dumped on the surface is going to be mixing and swirling and doing interesting things. So by having this balloon-mounted camera looking down on it, we'll be able to actually characterize some of that structure. And I'm really excited about that because it's a scale that's really hard to measure, 300 feet. You can't get that just from the ship, and you can't get that from a satellite or even an airplane. Spatial scale that we're going to be able to capture. Just as it's raining and just as it stopped raining, what's actually happening right at the sea surface.
This is a really exciting time to do an experiment like SPURS-2, especially for NASA, because our ability to observe precipitation and individual raining cells over oceans is much less advanced than over land, where we have ground-based radars that can remotely sense rain all the time. We rely on satellite instrumentation looking down from above over the oceans in these remote regions. The new NASA iMerge product was just released in the last couple of years, and we're now at 10-kilometer resolution every 30 minutes. And so we're finally approaching the air-sea interaction timescale with the satellite data available, and I think we'll learn a lot from both products.
The Earth's water cycle, precipitation, evaporation, freezing and melting, links land, ocean, and atmosphere. Ocean salinity is a rain gauge for the Earth, if scientists can figure out how to read it.
Science at work for you. This is APL, the Applied Physics Laboratory at the University of Washington in Seattle.